So I learned a lot about Vancouver that I had assumed I knew, but as I studied a little more, there was some things about it that surprised me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Vancouver and Seattle and a brief comparison between them, and this will be a little bit shorter. They both are rainy cities, as I mentioned. Vancouver has 184 kilometers a year. They're 184 kilometers apart, I'm sorry. That's a lot of rain, isn't it? They actually have gills in Vancouver. They're 184 kilometers apart, but there is a national boundary between them, which is surprising, the impact that it has. We can definitely go, like in Seattle, we can go up to Vancouver for the weekend and have fun and enjoy it, and it's a beautiful, livable city. Yet because of the constraints between the two nations, there's a lot less of the kind of interaction that you might expect. And of course, they're Canadian and we're Americans, and so that right there makes for a challenge. And I'm not blaming the Canadians when I say that, by the way. So there's 600,000 people in the city of Vancouver, 2.5 million that basically surround it, and it's about 150 years old. It's much younger than Seattle, which is 160 years old. But if you think about it, they're really both kind of like teenager cities in the sense that they're strong and healthy and vibrant, and they haven't broken that many times in the past, and they, as far as they know, the future's, all open for them, and in many ways that's true. But also they have their own challenges and their own uniqueness. One thing about Vancouver is it's twice as dense. It's half the physical size of Seattle, with almost the same population. So it's a much denser city and quite beautiful in its own right. As I mentioned, they're both doing well. They're both committed to climate change and sustainability, and they're both beautiful. So Vancouver too, flat areas that have mountains surrounding them and lots of water, mostly, that's fresh water on the bottom of the photo and salt water or that might actually be fresh water on both sides. Salt water comes in somewhere here. On the drinking water supply, they have 3 reservoirs, and they don't meter water to the single-family homes. So while they're getting 2% conservation every year, they still don't know who's using how much water. It's basically all you can take, and that seems to have worked so far. But that surprised me. I thought, you'd think you'd at least be keeping track of that. It is metered, of course, for the larger commercial users. They have an integrated stormwater plan, but look at the date, it's 2014. They are just starting on these kinds of green infrastructure ideas that I think are moving ahead in many other places. And they may have more going on than this, but this is their first, as far as I know, integrated stormwater plan. But again, they're starting to step up in that way of how do we weave green infrastructure into the city. They have 5 wastewater treatment plants. 2 of them have primary treatment, which means just get the solids out, throw a little bit of chlorine in there, and then send it out. So almost zero treatment. 3 of them are secondary levels of treatment, which is also not the highest levels by any case. And they've argued that they can get away with that because there's so much salt water that flushes by that it gets consumed by the saltwater estuaries. I don't agree with that, but that's what they've done, and they're now building this new secondary treatment plant here in Vancouver, and their mission is to make it at secondary levels, but they're kind of trying to build on it by their making sure that they have room up in the front for new innovations and at the back, so that they've planned it for higher levels of treatment, basically. They've also used a sewer heat recovery. As the wastewater comes in, it comes in at about 20 degrees centigrade. They're going to use that for a district energy system, which I'll describe more. And then they're also looking at the potential for biogas energy generation, et cetera. So it's kind of not the highest level of treatment, but they're making room for it to become more in the future and taking advantage of what they can in the near term. Sustainability was also early on in Vancouver in '91. Their city council said, on the south shore of False Creek, develop a neighborhood that's a model of sustainability and have it be forward-thinking on infrastructure, have energy reduction, high-performance buildings, and high transit access. And they did that. 91 was when they set that as a target, and that was actually a very powerful statement that came to pass. In 2003, they were early on in a task force called Cool Vancouver to look at what it meant to reduce greenhouse gas. In 2009, they got really ambitious. They want to be the greenest city in the world by 2020. And by green, they didn't just mean lots of vegetation. They also meant on a sustainability platform. So that's a strong ambition that still is afoot. And they developed the Greenest City Plan, which included a climate adaptation strategy in 2011. So Southeast Falls Creek, like Hammarby-Sjöstad, where it was an Olympic village competition, they were competing for the Winter Olympics. They used Southeast Falls Creek. They won, so they built it. And one of the things that they did was they put in a neighborhood utility district using the wastewater energy. So they basically have a heat exchanger at the wastewater, then they run it through a heat pump, and then they deliver chilled water or hot water to the development around it. And they found that 70% of the energy for this development is based on the initial temperature of the wastewater as it comes by. So they love these. They have these slender towers. It's interesting, the safety requirements are different in Canada than the US. They can use what's called a scissor stairway, which reduces the floor plate of the building, whereas in the US you have to use separate concrete stairways, which adds to the size of the building. So they have these lovely slender towers in Vancouver. This is how that energy district works, as I just described. They transfer the energy, then they send hot and cold water to run heat and cool buildings. The Canby Corridor, the quote is the power of nearness. There's a new light rail line that they're building down Canby Street, which is a big kind of a boulevard that connects a bunch of the city. And they're going to be putting underneath it neighborhood utility districts linked with the transit investment. And then each of the stops, they're building basically a little eco-village or a more dense development that will take advantage of the transit. So there's the photo of their plan, and the Canby Corridor is that straight line going diagonal across the image. Each of these little circles on the map shows the stops where they're going to be doing enhanced urban design activities, as well as having these neighborhood energy center connections. In their city plan, they think 11% of their non-carbon producing energy will come from these little neighborhood district plans. So rather than having it all at the end of the pipe, they're having it as the pipe goes by. So I'll show you here shortly. These are some of their neighborhood energy districts. So they just adopted this about 2 months ago, their Vancouver sewer heat policy. And I think it's interesting because they have quantified several years of research. They've quantified that they believe there's enough thermal energy in the wastewater stream to run 700 high-rises in Vancouver. And what they do is they're using the collection system as the distribution system. So wherever a new building is near a large sewer line, they can use that heat exchanger and then heat and cool the building, pulling heat out or putting heat into the sewer line on its way to the plant. So it's like beads on a string. Anywhere along these major sewer lines, you can put in a new system which will heat or cool the effluent on its way into, or the influent on its way into the sewer line. But because the temperature of the ground is fairly stable, they don't freeze the wastewater or boil it off. It ends up going still within the operational limits of the wastewater treatment plant. So they're going big time on the idea that they can run a bunch of the city using their sewer lines as the backbone for their energy district system. This is a heat map. Basically, the red lines are where there's lots of flow, therefore lots of capacity for lots of buildings. So where they're blue, you can still tap a little bit of energy. Where they get green and yellow even more, but the red are the hot zones. But the point is, anywhere along that line, they're basically allowing, within some constraints, people to go ahead and tap into the sewer line just for the thermal energy. So they have this climate adaptation strategy, which I was somewhat under-impressed with. And they, like many cities, they say it's going to rain more. It's going to be a little bit warmer. It's going to be drier in the summer. We're going to have more intense storms. Sea level rise is going to come by 2050. Seattle also has a climate adaptation plan. I would say both of them are not nearly at the level like the Copenhagen plan, I think is a fantastic plan. I don't think either Seattle or Vancouver is quite up to that level. And but the point is that that they do have a plan in place, and they've got a series of studies and or actions that they're taking, which again I said I can mention I think are more modest than one would hope. So here's my questions. Does this really add up? Are cities really missing the main issue because they're focusing within the silo of climate adaptation and not thinking more holistically? And so what does it take to really plan a city when the future is uncertain, either from climate change or from disasters that you know about that could come or that may come someday? And echoing Richard's concept is really sustainability really enough? And again, I mentioned this earlier, you know, can we really offer the next generation the same opportunity? I don't think so. So that's why my own definition of sustainability is morphing a little bit to what is the ability to sustain through good times and bad times for a long time? What does it take to sustain through good times and bad times for long times? And every city is resilient kind of in its nature because they, like they outlive wars, they outlive disasters, they outlive regime change, they outlive pandemics. Even all those bad things happen, they don't move, Peroni. People still are there. And they outlive the nations that claim them. So, for example, this is Fez in Morocco, over 1,000 years old, and it looks a lot like it did in the 15th century, this part of Fez anyway. This is Istanbul. It's a couple thousand years old, and it's been the capital city of regimes that have been gone for a long time. Paris, they say they're 5,000 years old. So when we have these little cities that are a mere 400 years old or a mere 170 years old, you know, we're just babies, we're just getting going. But the truth is that we can build and make investments now. They will have a 50 and 100 and a multi-100 year investment. So we really need to think what we're doing here and make sure that every decision we make isn't based on the 5-year election cycle. On the other hand, you don't want to build a 100-year system when you have no idea what it's going to be like in 100 years. For example, the plan from London that showed the plan for double the growth, yet that was still half of what it needed to be. So how do you make investment decisions where you don't know what the outside boundary really is? And what you do is you make them in increments that you can manage and that you can then adapt from. And when you take an adaptable approach to development, there's a subset of strategies, like the green infrastructure strategy that Richard suggests, that gives you more adaptability and flexibility to change as you go. Doesn't always mean you do one versus the other, but you have to think about them both. So that's where I again get back to resilience, again, as the model for how we think about investments that we make, because what we're planning for is not for things to be the same and better. We're planning for a city that can thrive through good times and bad times for a long time. And there's a different subset of strategies that many of which we already have in mind, some of which we shouldn't do because they make us more brittle. So we don't want to be brittle. We want to get through all of these cycles, have our city quickly go through the dark part. That's the measure of resilience, frankly, is how long it takes to recover from a disaster. So invest to have a short recovery period, and then invest for a very long growth and conservation period. So you can map where cities are. Seattle and Vancouver are up there. We're at the top of our game, and we hope it goes on for hundreds of years. But we also need to make investments because we know someday the earthquake will come or something else. I'm also working in Detroit with the Federal Emergency Management Administration. They're here. They're just now closing out their bankruptcy. They're at the beginning of their next cycle. They've lost 1 million people out of 1.7 million. But they are at the beginning. They actually have the chance to be North America's first 21st century city because everything is already broken. So they're reinvesting, and they actually got the people who they owed money to reinvest in the future of the city. Detroit is 300 years old. It's older than the United States government. It's going to be around in 300 more years. It actually has a chance to build itself into the next sustainable city of North America. Whether or not they do it, we'll see. But anyway, here's the 4 things that make cities more resilient. That idea of connecting across the silos, thinking about integrated solutions. Create neighborhoods, resilient neighborhoods across the city. And somehow I missed that slide. I accidentally must have tossed it out or gone by it. Where we talk about how at each neighborhood you can make it more semi-autonomous. Oh, there it is. It's not just green buildings, and it's not just a green city at the other end, it's these neighborhood levels. So like the new development that Gothenburg is looking at, these are a chance to build in very self-reliant mini communities that make the whole city more resilient because they can handle a lot of their resources on site. They can have green buildings, they can have district systems, and then when the city is populated with those, the whole city gets more resilient because you're providing services at multiple scales. Third is really connecting people, and we heard this from most of the presenters today. It's really about connecting people together. That's the number one determinant of social resilience, is the connectivity between people who are not only the same, like these dancers, but people that are different. So this is actually a diagram of monks in a monastery, and the red monks on the left are the most connected monks. So if you want to get anything done, you don't go talk to the monks on the right, you talk to the monks on the left. They're the ones that influence the other monks. So they're the nodes. So when we are trying to build social resilience, we want to connect with the people that are connected with people that aren't like us, get them connected together, so that we then have much more capacity and experience to draw from whenever change comes. We know who to motivate, who to contact, who to bring in that insight that's different than we might have otherwise had if we were all like that first set of dancers who looked the same and danced the same. And not that that's not fun, but we want diversity and we want connectivity. And then finally, really it's about creating places that people love, because then that will keep them coming back, that will keep them investing, keep them tipping in to making the community more and more of what it's going to be now and into the future. So thank you very much. That's the comparison.
Tack så mycket, Steve. Maybe one short question. Yes.
Hello, Johanna Sorensen, Lund University. I have a more practical question for you. You talked about these green streets and surface systems. Can you make them in more dense areas? And have you done it so far?
Yes. Can you make them more dense? Yes, you can. The design is different. They're hardened and they don't leak into the ground. But they're deeper and they can have a solid bottom on them. But again, you can integrate them in. So we have one that was nicknamed the Swale on Yale. Yale was the name of the street. And so it follows along a street on the way down, and it treats and cleans stormwater before it gets into the Lake Union. So it's in that area where all the air cloud computing is going on. So yes, you can.